In the vast cathedral of the cosmos, stars are born and die in silence. They burn for billions of years, indifferent to the empires that rise and fall beneath their light. Civilizations emerge, build monuments to their own greatness, and vanish, leaving nothing but dust and radio echoes that travel forever into the void, heard by no one.
Time moves differently out here, where 1,000 years is merely a breath between heartbeats, where the distance between worlds is measured not in kilometers, but in generations.
I have watched 647 years pass from the observation deck of the Velinori Grand Archives. I have seen the birth of nebulae, the death of suns, and the quiet extinction of 17 spacefaring species whose names are now forgotten by everyone except the archivists who catalog their remains. My name is Ketharon Soleth, third keeper of the historical continuity, and I have spent my entire existence believing that the Velinori ascendancy was eternal.
We were wrong. The message came at the 43rd hour of the cycle, when the archives were quiet and the junior archivists had retreated to their meditation chambers. I remember the exact color of the emergency beacon, a deep crimson that I had only seen in historical simulations, never in living memory. The Hegemony Council had activated the Omega Protocol. The word spread through the station like ice crystallizing in vacuum. The Drath Corps had broken through the Sentinel line. For those who do not know our history, and soon there may be no one left who does, the Sentinel line was the greatest defensive achievement in galactic history. 17,000 orbital platforms, each one armed with enough firepower to crack a moon, stretched across 42 light-years of space. It had taken the combined resources of 11 civilizations and 400 years to construct. It was meant to stand forever.
It fell in 18 days.
I did not witness the collapse firsthand. I learned of it through fragmented reports, through the hollow eyes of refugees who arrived at our station in ships that barely held atmosphere, through the sudden silences in communication channels that had been active for centuries. The Drath Corps did not negotiate. They did not demand surrender. They simply consumed. Worlds, resources, populations, with the mechanical efficiency of a species that had long ago abandoned anything resembling mercy.
By the time the Hegemony Council convened its emergency session, we had lost 43 inhabited worlds. 17 billion Velinori were dead or missing. Our fleet, once the pride of a dozen star systems, had been reduced to scattered remnants, fleeing through uncharted space. And in the midst of this catastrophe, someone, I still do not know who, suggested the unthinkable.
We must contact the humans.
I remember the silence that followed those words. It stretched for nearly a full minute, which among Velinori is an eternity. The humans, that primitive species on the edge of the Orion Spur, barely 3 centuries removed from their first interstellar flight. The ones we had dismissed, quarantined, and quietly monitored from a distance we considered safe.
"They are not ready," Elder Morithveen said, his voice carrying the weight of his 800 years. "They are violent, unpredictable, and dangerously young. Their history is nothing but an endless cycle of self-destruction. To invite them into this conflict would be to unleash chaos upon chaos."
"With respect, Elder," a younger counselor replied. "I believe it was Saroth, though the memory has grown uncertain. We are already facing chaos. The Drathkor do not distinguish between primitive and advanced. They will reach Earth within 2 cycles regardless of whether we contact humanity or not. The question is whether we warn them first.
Warn them. Marathfine's laugh was bitter. What could they possibly do? Their largest ships are barely capable of sublight travel. Their weapons are chemical propellants and crude fusion warheads. They would be vapor before they understood what was happening.
The debate continued for 3 more hours. I listened from my station in the archives, tasked with providing historical context whenever the council requested it. Mostly, they did not. They were too busy arguing about protocol, about precedent, about the proper procedures for contacting a quarantined species during a galactic emergency. Meanwhile, the Drathkor continued their advance, and more worlds fell silent. In the end, necessity overruled caution. We sent the message. I was not supposed to be part of the diplomatic mission. Archivists are observers, not participants. But when the delegation ship prepared to depart, they discovered that their cultural specialist had died in the initial attack, killed when a Drathkor strike force hit the hegemony's forward base. They needed someone who understood alien psychology, who could help interpret human responses and advise on communication strategies. They needed me. The journey to Earth took 17 days through emergency slip channels. I spent most of that time reviewing everything we knew about humanity, which was simultaneously too much and not enough. Their biological specifications, their cultural patterns, their wars, so many wars, fought over territory, resources, ideology, and sometimes nothing at all. Their art, which ranged from transcendent beauty to disturbing violence, often within the same piece. Their music, which could make even a Velanori feel something approximating emotion. But what struck me most was their history of survival. Ice ages, plagues, self-inflicted nuclear catastrophes that should have ended them, mass extinctions that wiped out 90% of all species on their world. And yet somehow, improbably, impossibly, they endured. They rebuilt. They reached for the stars with hands still scarred from the last time they had tried to destroy themselves. I did not understand them. I still do not fully understand them. But as our ship dropped out of slipspace at the edge of the solar system, I began to suspect that perhaps we had underestimated something fundamental about this species. The first surprise was their detection network. Our sensors registered it approximately 0.3 light-years from their home system, a distributed array of passive sensors and communication relays that had been carefully designed to look like natural debris. It was crude by Velanori standards, but it was also invisible to our initial scans. They had been watching the approaches to their system for decades, and we had never noticed. The second surprise was the response time. Within 4 minutes of our arrival, we received a hail from a human vessel that had apparently been waiting at the system's edge, not patrolling, waiting, as if they had known we were coming. Velanori diplomatic vessel, the human voice said, remarkably calm for a species that had never experienced formal contact with galactic civilization. This is the UNSS Vigilant. We have been expecting you. Please follow our beacon to the designated meeting coordinates. Do not deviate from the indicated flight path. Ambassador Kelleth, leader of our delegation, turned to me with an expression I had never seen on a Velanori face before. It took me a moment to identify it. Uncertainty. They were expecting us, she said. How is that possible? We only transmitted the initial contact signal 12 days ago. I had no answer. Neither did anyone else on the ship. The meeting coordinates led us to a station orbiting their 4th planet, the one they called Mars. It was not what I had expected.
The Velinori archives contained images of human orbital infrastructure from decades past, fragile habitats of metal and glass, barely capable of sustaining life. This station was different. Functional rather than elegant, yes, but there was something about its design that spoke of experience. The docking ports accommodated multiple ship configurations. The hull showed signs of repeated modification and expansion. Small patrol craft moved around its perimeter in patterns that were clearly defensive.
They had been building, quietly, for a long time.
We were met at the docking bay by a delegation of 5 humans. Their leader was a woman with gray-streaked hair and eyes that seemed to measure everything they saw. She introduced herself as Admiral Chen Wei-Lin, United Nations Space Command. Her handshake, a human greeting ritual involving physical contact, was firm but not aggressive.
Ambassador Keyleth, she said, her pronunciation of the Velinori name surprisingly accurate, welcome to Armstrong Station. I apologize for the lack of ceremony, but we understand time is critical.
Keyleth inclined her head in the traditional gesture of acknowledgement. You received our message. The situation is as we described. The Drath Corps have...
We know. Admiral Chen's voice was quiet, but something in her tone made Keyleth stop mid-sentence. We've been monitoring the situation for some time. Please, follow me. There's a great deal we need to discuss.
She turned and walked into the station without waiting for a response. We followed, too confused to do anything else.
The corridors of Armstrong Station were utilitarian, exposed conduits, practical lighting, none of the artistic flourishes that marked Velinari architecture. But they were also clean, well-maintained, and surprisingly busy. Humans in various uniforms moved past us with purpose, nodding to the Admiral but never stopping to stare at the alien delegation walking through their midst, as if they had seen aliens before, as if this was normal.
Admiral Chen, I said, speaking for the first time since we had boarded, I notice your people do not seem surprised by our presence. Has your species had contact with other galactic civilizations that we are unaware of? She glanced back at me with an expression I could not read. No, Archivist. You're the first to openly acknowledge us, but we've known we weren't alone for quite some time. Your quarantine protocols are thorough, but not perfect.
Before I could ask what she meant, we arrived at our destination, a conference room with a large oval table and a wall of displays showing star maps. Real-time star maps, I realized with a start, showing the positions of known civilizations, trade routes, and most disturbingly, the Drath Corps advance. The accuracy of the information was impossible. We had never shared this data with humans. They could not have acquired it legally.
Please, sit, Admiral Chen said, taking her place at the head of the table. Let's begin with what you know about our species. I suspect it will save us all some time.
Ambassador Keyleth hesitated, clearly unsettled by the shift in expected dynamics. She had come here expecting to explain the situation to a primitive species, to offer guidance and perhaps protection in exchange for... what? Resources? Strategic positioning? I was never entirely clear on what the hegemony had hoped to gain from this contact. Now, watching the calm confidence of the humans around us, I wondered if we had ever truly understood the situation at all.
We know, Keyleth began carefully, that humanity achieved spaceflight approximately 300 standard years ago, that your species experienced a period of rapid expansion followed by consolidation, that you have established colonies on several bodies within your home system and launched exploration missions to nearby star systems, that your technology, while advancing rapidly, remains significantly behind galactic standard in most areas.
Admiral Chen nodded. All true. What else? We know that your species has a contentious history, numerous wars, ideological conflicts, and near-extinction events. We know that you were placed under quarantine protocols by the Hegemony Council 7 generations ago, classified as potentially dangerous and not yet ready for integration into galactic society. Kileth paused. We know that this decision was controversial at the time and has been debated since.
Controversial. Admiral Chen's voice was flat. An interesting word choice. The Velinori Ascendancy decided, without our knowledge or consent, that humanity would be isolated from the rest of intelligent life in the galaxy. You watched us for centuries. You studied us. You made decisions about our fate as if we were specimens in a laboratory. She leaned forward. Tell me, Ambassador, did you ever consider simply asking us what we wanted?
The silence that followed was uncomfortable in ways I had not anticipated. Kileth's skin shifted to a pale blue, embarrassment in Velinori body language, but she did not look away.
No, she admitted. We did not. It was believed that contact would accelerate your technological development before your species had matured sufficiently to...
Before we could be trusted not to destroy ourselves or others. Admiral Chen finished the sentence without rancor. Yes, we're aware of that assessment. We found fragments of your observation reports in debris fields near our outer colonies. Fascinating reading. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You thought we were children playing with fire in a room full of explosives, too dangerous to be trusted, too primitive to be taken seriously.
I felt compelled to speak. Admiral, for what it is worth, the quarantine decision was not unanimous. There were those among our scholars who argued that humanity's resilience was itself a form of maturity, that a species capable of surviving its own worst impulses might have something valuable to offer.
Those scholars were right, Chen said. And now you need that resilience, don't you? The Draft Corps are coming. Your fleets are broken, your defensive lines have fallen, and suddenly the primitive species you kept quarantined for 7 generations looks like the only hope you have left.
Ambassador Kileth's composure cracked just slightly. Admiral, I will not pretend that we are coming to you from a position of strength. The situation is dire. But we came here to warn you as much as to ask for assistance. The Draft Corps will not stop at Velinori space. They will continue until there is nothing left to consume. Your world, your species, will not be spared.
We know. Chen's voice softened slightly. We've known for 18 months, long before your first transmission reached us.
That's impossible, Kileth said. How could you possibly... Because we've been listening. Chen stood and walked to the wall of displays. With a gesture, she expanded one of the star maps. 70 years ago, we launched our first deep space listening post. A small thing, barely functional by your standards, but capable of picking up signals from across the galaxy. We heard your communications. We decrypted your languages. We learned about the civilizations you thought we were too primitive to know about.
She traced a line across the map with her finger. 40 years ago, we detected unusual patterns in signals from Draft Corps space, aggressive expansion, systematic consumption of resources. We ran the projections. At their current rate of advance, they would reach galactic core territories within 2 centuries, human space within 3.
You've known about the Draft Corps for 40 years? I could not keep the disbelief from my voice. And you said nothing?
Who would we have told? Chen turned to face me. The civilizations that refused to acknowledge our existence? The Hegemony Council that classified us as a potential threat? We tried sending signals, Archivist.
carefully worded messages about the patterns we had observed, the danger we had identified. They were ignored, dismissed as noise from an unremarkable system in an unremarkable arm of an unremarkable galaxy. She returned to her seat. So we did what humans have always done when faced with a threat that no one else is prepared to address. We started preparing ourselves.
The next hour was the most disorienting of my existence. Admiral Chen laid out in precise and devastating detail the scope of humanity's secret preparations. The listening posts had been the beginning.
Behind them came research stations, hidden in asteroid fields and the atmospheres of gas giants, mining operations on bodies too small or too distant for casual observation, manufacturing facilities buried beneath the surfaces of moons, shipyards that had been building vessels not for exploration, but for war.
"You have to understand," Chen explained. "We never wanted this. Humanity was tired of war. We had spent centuries trying to move past our violent history, trying to become something better. But when you look at the stars and see something coming that wants to consume everything you are, everything you might become—" She shook her head. "Pacifism is a luxury. We couldn't afford it anymore."
"How many ships?" Ambassador Kelleth asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper.
"Nets classified." Chen's expression gave nothing away. "What I can tell you is that we have enough. We've been building for 4 decades, Admiral, with the full resources of a species that spent millennia mastering the art of industrial warfare. When we decide to produce something, we produce it at scale."
I thought of the hegemony's shipyards, the pride of our civilization, capable of producing perhaps 100 vessels per year. I thought of the human capacity for mass production that I had read about in their history, the wars where they had built tens of thousands of combat vehicles in mere years, where entire economies had been transformed into weapons factories overnight. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with temperature.
"Why are you telling us this?" I asked. "If you have these resources, these capabilities, why reveal them to us now?"
Chen was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, softer, more human, if that makes sense. "Because we're not monsters, Archivist. Because despite everything you've done to us, despite the arrogance and the dismissals and the centuries of being treated like children who couldn't be trusted with sharp objects, we're not going to let billions of innocent beings die if there's something we can do to prevent it." She met Ambassador Kelleth's eyes directly. "We're offering an alliance, not servitude, not subsumption into your hegemony, not the role of primitive auxiliaries in your war. A partnership of equals. We fight together or we fall separately. Those are the terms."
Kelleth's response was immediate. The Hegemony Council would never.
"The Hegemony Council is irrelevant." Chen's voice hardened. "Half your council worlds have already fallen. The rest are in chaos. You don't have the luxury of bureaucratic deliberation anymore, Ambassador. The Drath Corps will be in Villanori core space within 40 standard days. After that, they'll reach the secondary armed civilizations within a year, Earth within 18 months. She spread her hands. "This isn't a negotiation, it's a choice."
"Accept our help on our terms, or watch the galaxy burn." The ambassador opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. I watched her struggle with the fundamental reordering of reality that Chen's words demanded. For 7 generations, the Villanori had been the elder civilization, the wise guardians who made decisions for the good of all. Now, in the span of an hour, that identity had been shattered. We were not the protectors, we were the protected. And the species we had dismissed as primitive children were offering to save us. I need to consult with my government, Kelleth finally said. What remains of it?
Of course. Chen stood. We've prepared quarters for you and your delegation. Secure communications have been established to whatever Velinori command structure is still functioning. Take the time you need. But, Ambassador, she paused at the door, don't take too much time. The Droth Corps won't wait for consensus.
She left. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, though my chronometer informed me it was only 11 minutes. Finally, Ambassador Caliph spoke.
Archivist Catharin, I need your honest assessment. Is she telling the truth? Could humanity truly have developed capabilities we never detected?
I considered the question carefully. Ambassador, in my 6 centuries of service, I have studied hundreds of species, their rise, their fall, their patterns of development. What I have seen today does not match any model I know. I paused, choosing my words. Humans should not be capable of what Admiral Chen describes. Their technology base is too limited, their infrastructure too primitive, their history too chaotic. And yet we have consistently underestimated them. Every projection, every assessment, every model we have ever built for human development has proven wrong. They advance faster than expected. They adapt in ways we do not anticipate. They find solutions to problems we would consider impossible. I met her eyes. I believe she is telling the truth. I believe humanity has been preparing for this moment for decades, and I believe we have been blind to it because we never truly looked.
The next several days were a blur of communications, negotiations, and the gradual unraveling of everything I thought I understood about galactic civilization. Ambassador Caliph made contact with the surviving members of the Hegemony Council, a pathetic remnant of 7 individuals scattered across 3 refugee fleets. They debated, argued, and ultimately capitulated, not because they believed in humanity's offer, but because they had no alternative.
Meanwhile, I was given unprecedented access to Armstrong's station. Admiral Chen assigned a young officer named Lieutenant Commander Sarah Okonkwo to serve as my guide, my handler, really, though she was too polite to use that term. Sarah was patient, intelligent, and genuinely curious about Velinori culture. She answered my questions honestly, within limits, and asked her own in return.
"What is it like," she asked one evening, as we shared a meal in the station's observation lounge, "to live for centuries, to watch so much time pass?"
I considered the question. It is both gift and burden. We see patterns that shorter-lived species miss. We understand that civilizations rise and fall, that nothing is permanent. But we also become comfortable. We assume that because something has always been a certain way, it will continue to be so. I gestured toward the viewport, where Earth hung like a blue jewel against the darkness. Your species has taught me that assumption is dangerous.
How so?
We assumed you were primitive because your technology was less advanced than ours. We assumed you were dangerous because your history was violent. We assumed you would destroy yourselves because you had come so close so many times. I turned to face her, but we never considered that your violence might be a form of adaptation, that your history of near destruction might have taught you to prepare for the unthinkable, that your apparent chaos might hide a unity we could not perceive.
Sarah smiled, but there was something sad in it. "We're not as united as you might think. We argue constantly. We disagree about almost everything. But when something threatens all of us, something truly existential," she shrugged, "we find a way to work together. We always have."
How? I don't know, she admitted. Maybe it's because we've been on the edge of extinction so many times. Maybe it's genetic. some survival instinct that kicks in when the stakes are high enough. Or maybe, she paused, looking out at the stars, maybe we're just too stubborn to die.
I thought about her words often in the days that followed, as the situation grew increasingly dire. Reports from the front were catastrophic. The Drath Corps had pushed through the Velinori core systems with terrifying efficiency. World after world fell silent, not destroyed, but consumed, their populations absorbed into the Drath Corps collective in ways we did not fully understand. The refugee fleets scattered, running for any safe haven they could find. Some came to human space.
Many did not make it.
18 days after our arrival, I witnessed something I will never forget. Admiral Chen had invited our delegation to observe what she called a fleet review. I expected a ceremonial display, a few dozen ships performing coordinated maneuvers, a show of strength meant to reassure their new allies. What I saw instead fundamentally altered my understanding of what humanity was.
We were taken to a viewing platform on the outer edge of the solar system, near a cluster of small moons that orbited their largest gas giant. From there, we watched as the first ships emerged from behind the moon's shadow. Then more, then more.
They kept coming.
For 3 hours, ships emerged in an endless stream. Carriers, cruisers, destroyers, support vessels, troop transports. They filled the space around us like a mechanical storm, each one bearing the insignia of the United Nations Space Command. Some were clearly older designs, retrofitted and upgraded. Others were fresh from the shipyards, their hulls still gleaming. All of them were armed. Ambassador Kaleth stood beside me, her skin cycling through colors that indicated shock, disbelief, and something approaching terror. "How many?" she whispered.
Admiral Chen answered without looking away from the display. "What you're seeing is the Third Fleet, 1 of 7.
1 of 7? Keleth's voice cracked. That's impossible. The resources required, the industrial capacity.
We've had 40 years. Chen turned to face us. 40 years of knowing that something terrible was coming. 40 years of building, training, preparing. Every nation on Earth, every colony, every outpost, all of them contributing to a single purpose. Her eyes were hard. You left us alone out here, Ambassador. You thought we were too primitive to matter, so we had to become strong enough to matter.
I found my voice. The hegemony at its height could field perhaps 12,000 combat vessels. You're suggesting humanity has
More. Chen smiled, but there was no joy in it. Much more. When your species decided we weren't worth acknowledging, you gave us something precious. Time. Time to develop our own technologies. Time to learn from your mistakes. Time to build something you never imagined we could. She gestured toward the assembled fleet. This is what humanity does when we're frightened, Archivist. We don't curl up and wait to die. We prepare, we build, we fight, and we never, ever stop fighting until the threat is gone. Over the following weeks, I learned more about humanity's preparations. The fleet was only the most visible aspect. Beneath it lay a vast infrastructure of intelligence networks, supply chains, and strategic planning that spanned decades. Human scientists had studied Drathcore technology from captured probes and debris, developing countermeasures and weapons specifically designed to exploit their weaknesses. Human strategists had wargamed thousands of scenarios, preparing for every contingency.
Human soldiers had trained for a war they hoped would never come, but knew in their hearts was inevitable.
And through it all, they had remained silent.
not broadcasting their preparations, not seeking acknowledgement, not asking permission from the civilizations that had dismissed them. They had simply done what needed to be done and waited for the moment when it would matter.
That moment came 42 days after our arrival, when the Drathkor advance elements entered the Outer Ring territories, the final buffer zone between Velinori space and the human sphere. We received the reports in real time. 600 Drathkor vessels, supported by 3 massive processing ships that converted consumed worlds into raw materials for further conquest. They moved with the confidence of a force that had never known defeat. They broadcast a message to all species in their path, the same message they always sent: resistance is inefficient, consumption is inevitable. Submit and be assimilated, or be destroyed and then assimilated. There is no third option.
Their response came not from any Velinori command, but from a human communications relay at the edge of the Outer Ring. It was broadcast on all frequencies, in all known languages, and I learned later that Admiral Chen herself had recorded it. Drathkor Fleet. This is Admiral Chen Wei-Lin of the United Nations Space Command. You are approaching territory under human protection. You have 1 standard hour to alter your course and return to your own space. This is your only warning. The Drathkor did not respond. They never responded to warnings. In their thousands of years of expansion, no species had ever presented a threat significant enough to warrant consideration. They simply continued their advance. 1 hour later, the first human fleet emerged from concealed positions throughout the Outer Ring, not just ahead of the Drathkor force, but around it, on all sides, above and below. A sphere of warships that closed in with the precision of a trap that had been decades in the making. I watched the battle from Admiral Chen's command ship. I wish I could say it was glorious, but that would be a lie. War is never glorious. It is chaos and terror and the screaming of dying beings across the void. But what I witnessed that day was something beyond war. It was extermination. Human weapons were not more advanced than Velinori systems. In many cases, they were cruder, less elegant, less refined, but they had been specifically designed for one purpose: to kill Drathkor. Every frequency, every attack vector, every tactical approach had been calculated based on 40 years of observation and analysis. The Drathkor adapted quickly. They always did, but the humans adapted faster. When one attack pattern failed, another was already in motion. When Drathkor countermeasures neutralized human weapons, those weapons were already being modified on the fly by teams of engineers who had prepared for exactly that scenario. When individual human ships were destroyed, and many were, their crews transmitted their final sensor readings to the fleet, adding to the collective understanding that informed the next wave of attacks. In 4 hours, the Drathkor advance force was annihilated. Not defeated, not driven back, annihilated. 600 vessels reduced to expanding clouds of debris. The 3 processing ships were captured intact, a deliberate choice that required immense precision and cost dozens of human lives, but provided intelligence that would prove invaluable in the battles to come. And then, something unprecedented happened. The Drathkor fell silent. For 3 days, there was no communication from the Drathkor collective. No attacks, no expansion, no signals of any kind. The entire civilization seemed to pause, as if struggling to process an outcome they had never anticipated. When they finally responded, it was with the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. 40,000 vessels, drawn from every corner of their territory, converging on human space. "They're coming," Admiral Chen said, studying the sensor data with an expression I had learned to recognize as human determination. Everything they have. They finally understand that we're a real threat.
"Can you stop them?" Ambassador Queleth asked. Her voice was steady, but I could see the fear in her color patterns.
Chen smiled, a genuine smile this time, though there was no comfort in it. "We're about to find out." The next months were a nightmare. The Drath Corps threw everything they had at human space, and humanity met them at every turn. Battles raged across dozens of star systems, leaving fields of debris that would drift through the void for millennia. The human fleets took terrible losses. I saw ships named after cities, nations, and heroes of human history blink out of existence in moments of terrible violence. But for every human vessel that fell, 3 Drath Corps ships died with it. And always there were more human ships coming. Fresh from the shipyards of Earth and Mars and the colonies scattered throughout their system, they emerged in a stream that seemed to have no end. The industrial might of a species that had once nearly destroyed itself with war was now directed outward, and it was terrible to behold. I remember a conversation with Lieutenant Commander Okonkwo during one of the brief pauses in the fighting. We were aboard a medical ship, helping coordinate the treatment of wounded soldiers from a dozen species, Velinori refugees who had fled the Drath Corps advance, members of other civilizations who had thrown their lot in with humanity, and, of course, humans themselves.
"How do you do this?" I asked her. "How do you keep fighting when the losses are so great?" Sarah looked at me with eyes that had aged years in months. "Because the alternative is worse," she said simply. "Because if we stop, everyone dies. Not just us, everyone." She gestured toward the medical bay, where surgeons were working desperately to save a Velinori child who had been injured in a refugee convoy attack. "We're fighting for them, for everyone who can't fight for themselves. That's what makes it bearable."
But the cost?
"The cost is everything we have," Sarah agreed. "And we'll pay it, every last one of us, if that's what it takes." She smiled sadly. "That's what you never understood about us, Archivist. You saw our violence and our chaos and our near extinctions, and you thought we were weak. But those things are what made us strong. We've been practicing for this our entire existence." I thought about that often in the days that followed. The Velinori had built their civilization on the assumption that stability was strength. We had endured for thousands of years by avoiding conflict, by maintaining equilibrium, by carefully managing the balance of power. And when that balance was disrupted, we had no idea how to respond.
Humans were different. Their entire history was a chronicle of disruption, of catastrophe, of existential threats overcome through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. They had never known stability, not really, and so they had learned to thrive in chaos, to find strength in adversity, to transform crisis into opportunity. The Drath Corps had never faced anything like them. And as the months passed, as the human fleets pushed back and then forward, as system after system was liberated and the Drath Corps were forced to retreat for the first time in their history, I began to understand that something fundamental had shifted in the galaxy.
The war lasted 14 months in total. I could describe every battle, every campaign, every moment of triumph and tragedy that marked humanity's impossible victory. But the details matter less than the outcome. The Drath Corps were broken. Not just defeated, broken. Their collective consciousness, which had unified billions of individual beings into a single consuming purpose, fragmented under the relentless pressure of human resistance.
Factions emerged, fought amongst themselves, retreated to their core territories. And then, for the first time in galactic history, the Drathkor sued for peace.
I was present at the negotiations, in my capacity as an archivist documenting the proceedings for future generations. Admiral Chen, now Fleet Admiral Chen, after a battlefield promotion that came with the weight of 100,000 dead under her command, represented humanity.
The Drathkor delegation was unlike anything we had ever seen. 3 individuals who had somehow separated themselves from the collective, speaking with voices that trembled with the unfamiliar experience of individual thought.
Why? The lead Drathkor asked. Its form was still unsettling, a mass of organic and mechanical components that defied easy categorization, but its voice was almost plaintive. We have consumed thousands of species. None resisted as you did. None could. What makes you different?
Chen was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was tired, the exhaustion of someone who had carried an impossible burden and was only now beginning to set it down.
You want to know what makes us different? She leaned forward. We've been dying since we crawled out of the oceans. Plagues, ice ages, asteroids, our own stupidity, everything that could kill us has tried, and every single time we found a way to survive. We're not more advanced than you. We're not smarter or stronger or more unified. We're just harder to kill.
She stood, and for a moment I saw not the Admiral but the species she represented, scarred, battered, grieving, and absolutely unbroken.
You thought the galaxy was yours to consume, she continued. You thought there was nothing that could stop you, no force that could match your hunger. But you forgot something that every species eventually learns. The universe doesn't care about destiny. It doesn't care about your plans or your superiority or your assumptions. It just is. And sometimes it produces something like us, something too stubborn to know when it should die.
The peace treaty that followed was unlike any in galactic history. The Drathkor withdrew to their original territory, bound by agreements that would be enforced by the combined fleets of every surviving civilization. Humanity demanded no reparations, no tribute, no punishment beyond the end of expansion. When asked why, Chen's answer was simple. We didn't fight this war for revenge. We fought it to survive. Now that we have, there's no point in creating new enemies.
In the months that followed, I watched the galaxy slowly rebuild. The Velinori ascendancy was gone as a political entity. Too many worlds lost, too many people dead, too much infrastructure destroyed. But Velinori culture survived, preserved in the memories and traditions of refugees who had found homes among a dozen different species. Some settled on human worlds, invited by a species that knew something about rebuilding after catastrophe.
I was offered a position at a new institution, the Galactic Archives, a joint project between humanity and the surviving civilizations to preserve the history of what had been lost and document the new order that was emerging. Fleet Admiral Chen herself made the offer during a brief meeting on the reconstructed station that had once been the heart of Velinori space.
We need people who understand the past, she said. People who can help us avoid the mistakes that led to all this. She smiled, and for the first time I saw warmth in it, genuine connection. Besides, you're the only one who's been watching humanity for long enough to keep us honest. We need someone to call us out when we start getting arrogant.
I'm not certain I'm qualified for that role, I admitted. My people spent generations dismissing yours as primitives. We failed to see what you truly were.
And what are we, truly? I considered the question, the same question I had been asking myself since the moment I first stepped aboard Armstrong Station. Survivors, I finally said. The galaxy has many ancient civilizations, many powerful species, many great empires. But in all my centuries of study,
I have never encountered a species as skilled at survival as yours. Not because you are the strongest or the wisest, but because you simply refuse to give up.
No matter how dark things become, no matter how impossible the odds, you find a way to continue.
Chen nodded slowly. "We call it hope," she said. "The belief that tomorrow can be better than today, even when all the evidence suggests otherwise. It's not rational, and it's certainly not always justified. But it's kept us going through ice ages and plagues and world wars, and the silence of a galaxy that wanted nothing to do with us."
"And now?" I asked. "Now that the galaxy has finally noticed you, what will you do with that hope?"
She turned to look out the viewport, where human ships and Velinori vessels and craft from a dozen other civilizations moved in patterns of cooperation that would have been unthinkable just 2 years before.
"Build something better," she said quietly. "Something that includes everyone, not just the species who got there first. Something worth all the lives that were lost to make it possible."
I accepted the position. Of course I did. After everything I had witnessed, I could not simply return to the role of passive observer. The galaxy had changed too much. I had changed too much.
That was 5 years ago. I am writing this account from my office in the Galactic Archives, on a station that orbits the world humans call Mars. Through my viewport, I can see Earth, the small blue planet that produced a species everyone thought was bluffing when they said they would fight.
The galaxy is quieter now. Not silent, not empty, but calmer than it has been in generations. Trade routes have been re-established. Refugee populations are rebuilding their lives. New civilizations, long hidden in the shadows of great powers, are emerging to take their places in the galactic community. And at the center of it all, more visible than they ever were before, stand the humans, watching, building, helping, waiting.
Sometimes I wonder what they're waiting for. Another threat, perhaps? Another challenge that will require their particular talent for survival? Or maybe just the slow work of making the galaxy a place worth surviving in?
I asked Sarah about it once, during one of her visits to the archives. She is an admiral now herself, though she still makes time for her old Velinori friend. "What are we waiting for?" She laughed and shook her head. "Nothing, Catharn. We're not waiting for anything. We're just living, trying to make the most of the time we have. That's all any of us can do."
"But the fleets," I pressed, "the defenses, you're still building, still preparing."
Of course we are. Her smile faded slightly. The Drathkor aren't the only threat in the universe. There are things out there, Catharin, things we've detected at the edges of our sensors, signals from civilizations we don't understand. We have to be ready.
And if those civilizations are peaceful, if they want friendship, not conflict, then we'll be the best friends they've ever had. Sarah's smile returned. That's the thing about being prepared for the worst. It means you're also ready for the best. We're not hoping for another war, but if one comes, we'll be there, and we won't stop until everyone is safe. She left shortly after, called away to deal with some crisis or another that required her attention. I watched her go, this human who had become dear to me over years of shared struggle and recovery, and I thought about the journey that had brought us here. Humanity had been alone in the dark, watching the stars and dreaming of contact with civilizations that had already decided they were unworthy of acknowledgement. They had faced the silence of an indifferent universe and refused to be diminished by it. They had prepared for a threat that no one else saw coming, and when that threat arrived, they had met it with everything they had.
And then, when they could have claimed dominance over a shattered galaxy, they had chosen something harder. They had chosen partnership. They had chosen to help rebuild what had been lost, to offer their strength in service of something greater than themselves.
I understand them better now than I did that first day on Armstrong Station, but I do not understand them completely. I doubt I ever will. Perhaps that is the nature of humanity, to always be more than anyone expects, to always surprise even those who think they know them.
The galaxy thought Earth was bluffing when humanity said they would fight. It thought Earth was bluffing when humanity said they would win.
It thought Earth was bluffing when humanity said they would help rebuild, when they offered peace instead of vengeance, when they extended hands of friendship to species that had dismissed them for generations.
Space went silent after the Drathkor War, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of listening. Every civilization in the galaxy, every species that had survived the cataclysm, was watching humanity, waiting to see what they would do with their new power, wondering if the children had become the parents, if the primitives had become the new rulers of a changed cosmos.
What they saw was something unexpected. Humanity did not seek to rule. They sought to protect. They sought to build. They sought to create a galaxy where no species would ever be dismissed as unworthy, where no voice would be silenced simply because it came from a world on the unfashionable edge of the Orion Spur.
And slowly, carefully, one relationship at a time, they began to fill that silence with something new. Hope. The same stubborn, irrational, impossible hope that had carried them through ice ages and plagues and their own worst impulses. The hope that tomorrow could be better. The hope that pain could become purpose, that struggle could become strength, that the very qualities that had once nearly destroyed them could be transformed into the foundation of something beautiful.
I am old now. Even by Velinori standards, I have watched civilizations rise and fall, stars born and die, the slow turning of epochs that spans longer than human history itself. But I have never witnessed anything like what humanity is building. A galactic community founded not on dominance or fear, but on the radical belief that every species, no matter how primitive or powerful, has something valuable to offer.
They thought Earth was bluffing. They were wrong. And now, as I look out at the stars from this station orbiting Mars, I find myself grateful for that mistake. Because in their arrogance, in their dismissal of a young species on an unremarkable world, the ancient civilizations of the galaxy created something they never intended. They created the conditions for humanity to become exactly what the universe needed.
The stars are quiet tonight. Earth glows softly in the distance, blue and green and white, impossibly fragile from out here. Somewhere down there, billions of humans are going about their lives, unaware of the vast machinery of protection that watches over them, unaware of the role their species plays in the fate of civilizations they will never meet. And somewhere out in the darkness, at the edges of sensor range and beyond, there are signals, faint communications from civilizations unknown, stirrings of something that may one day require humanity's attention once again.
I am not afraid, not anymore, because I have learned something in my time among humans. The universe is vast and dark and full of dangers that would make even the Drathkor seem mild by comparison. But somewhere in that darkness, on a small blue world orbiting an ordinary star, there evolved a species that refuses to surrender, a species that looks at the impossible and sees only an interesting challenge.
A species that forged itself in the fires of its own near extinction and emerged tempered, hardened, and utterly unbreakable.
Humanity doesn't bluff.
And that, more than anything else, gives me hope for what comes next. The silence of space is not empty. It is waiting. And when something finally answers from the void, when the next great challenge emerges from the cosmic dark, humanity will be there to meet it.
They always are.
They always will be.
And the galaxy, having learned its lesson, will never underestimate them again.